He's the talker.
Okay. Kim, thank you for your confidence. We appreciate it. And it looks
I
like
caught it right when we started live streaming too.
Right. So Commissioner Alcorn, I think it's 7 o'clock. I think it's appropriate for us to start this evening's proceedings. And welcome everyone, and welcome the City of Milpitas Planning Commission, April 14th, 2021 meeting. Before we start on the agenda as a public service announcement, any members of the public who wish to address the commission during the public forum or comment on the public hearing item this evening, please refer to the this evening's meeting agenda to get the instructions to join in on the Zoom via the City of Milpitas IT department's pathway. And thank you very much. And calling the meeting to order. And the next agenda item here is Pledge of Allegiance. Commissioner Ciardella, would you please lead us in the pledge?
Of course. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and the republic
for which
it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Thank you all, and we appreciate seeing everyone's wardrobe selection this evening. Thank you. And the next agenda item here is the roll call. Will the commission secretary conduct a roll call, please?
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. Commissioner Albana.
Present.
Commissioner Alcorn.
Here.
Commissioner Belong.
Here.
Vice Chair Chuan.
Here.
Commissioner Ciardella.
Present.
Commissioner Galong.
Present.
And Chair Tao.
Here. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the next agenda item here is conflict of interest declaration. City Attorney, if you will, poll the commissioners, please.
Yes, Chair, thanks. I ask whether any of the commissioners have a conflict of interest on any of the items before you tonight. I'll just go down the line. Commissioner Galong.
No.
Commissioner Ciardella.
No.
Commissioner Albana.
No.
Commissioner Belong. Commissioner Alcorn. Commissioner Chuan, Vice Chair Chuan.
None.
And Chair Tao.
None.
Let the record reflect none to that question.
Thank you, Mr. De Los Angeles. And the next agenda item here is approval of the agenda. And commissioners, any changes? Staff, any changes?
There is one change.
I'd like to make a
Vice Chair?
motion to approve the agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, there's one change on the agenda tonight, Mr. Chair. Sorry. So the second item listed under public, or excuse me, the first item listed under public hearings, which is a zoning text amendment for accessory dwelling units, has been moved to a new date, which will be at the end of your second meeting in May 26th.
Okay. Thank you, Planning Director. We appreciate it. And Vice Chair, you have the motion with the cancellation of the first public hearing item, correct?
Actually, the first one already states that in the latest agenda. So it actually says recommendation. Staff recommends to move to certain dates. So yes, I will amend my motion to move to approve the agenda for April 14th, amending item number 1 of the public hearing item to move to May 26, 2021.
Thank you. And did I have a second here from Commissioner Galong earlier? Commissioner Galong, you're still muted.
Yeah, second.
Okay, and a second to the amended motion, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. And so I'll go down the line for the we have a motion by Vice Chair Chuan and second by Commissioner Galong. I'll go down the line. And Commissioner Albana?
Aye.
Commissioner Galong?
Aye.
Commissioner Ciardella?
Aye.
Commissioner Belong,
Aye.
Commissioner Alcorn,
Aye.
Vice Chair Chuan,
Aye.
Chair, I as well, 7-0 passed. Thank you very much. And the next agenda item here is the approval of minutes, and that the March 24th, 2021 meeting minutes has been deferred to the next meeting. And so we'll review and approve at that point. The next agenda item here is announcements. Commissioners, any announcements?
I have one.
Vice Chair, please.
Yeah, just wanted to make note that so anyone who is attending the Planning Commissioner Academy, I realized there was an email that was sent out about some additional training. So if you can have two choices. It looks like you can take it at, there was an email that got sent out that you can go through the HR to take that, or there's a training on Friday for those who are attending the Planning Commissioner from 10 to 12. And I think there's still some time to sign up. That's my announcement.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And Commissioner Ciradella, I saw your hand raised. Is that correct?
Oh, I'm sorry, I was scratching my face.
Okay, so noted. Thank you. Commissioners, any other announcements? Okay, seeing none. And staff, Planning Director and the Planning Manager, any announcements?
I do not have any announcements tonight, Mr. Chair. Well, Planning Manager, do you have any?
Nope, no announcements. Thanks.
Thank you. And the next agenda item here is public forum. Those interested are invited to address Planning Commission on any subject not on tonight's agenda, orally via Zoom webinar, instructions above. Speakers may provide their name and city of residence for the recording secretary's record, and comments may be limited to 3 minutes or less. As an item not listed on the agenda, no response is required from city staff or the Planning Commission, and no action can be taken. Planning Commission may instruct the staff to place the item on a future meeting agenda. Ms. Medina, are there any public comments in the queue?
Hi, Chair. We have no community members in the queue for public forum.
Thank you. So can I have a motion to close the public forum, please?
Motion to close the public forum?
Second.
So I hear Commissioner Alcorn motion and Commissioner Ciradella second. So I'll go down the line for the motion here. And Commissioner Albana? Commissioner, okay. I hear aye, is that correct? Okay, thank you. Commissioner Belong?
Aye.
Commissioner Ciradella?
Aye.
Commissioner Belong?
Aye.
Commissioner Alcorn?
Aye.
Vice Chair Chuan?
Aye.
Chair's aye as well. Motion passed 7 to close the public forum. The next item here is public hearing with the first item to be deferred to the meeting on May 26, 2021. And we have a second item on the public hearing on the agenda this evening. So if the planning manager will do the introduction and the notations. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Tao. Good evening, everyone, fellow commissioners, staff. Just wanted to take a moment to introduce this item. And originally, I just wanted to note that we had this topic was actually brought up back in August of last year. So there are a couple of commissioners that may not have been present for it, but the majority of the Planning Commission has heard a little bit about this. We've been talking about this new vehicle miles traveled or VMT policy. Staff has been working on this for quite some time, and that's addressed in your staff report, but we're ready to present that policy to you tonight. And as you're aware, this is basically due to some legislative changes from Senate Bill 743 that required that all cities in California now look at vehicle miles traveled as a measurement for traffic impacts instead of looking at level of service. So to give more detail and to get into this, I'd just like to welcome Jay Lee, who's our principal planner, and also welcome Karen Mack, who's a consultant that's been working on this project and this policy with us since its inception, and they will lead you into the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Garner, and Mr. Lee, thank you, and welcome this evening.
Thank you. Good evening, commissioners. I'm happy to be here to present on this item. So just waiting for the slides to show up. All right, there it is. Again, my name is Jay Lee, and I'm here to present on this item, vehicle miles traveled policy to implement Senate Bill 743. Next slide, please. All right, so for this presentation, I'll start with providing a brief background of Senate Bill 743, then go over the policy's consistency with adopted city policies and plans, then go over the policy development process, and then go over the key policy components, and conclude by providing a summary of all of staff's recommendations as in the new policy. Next slide, please. All right, so what is Senate Bill 743? Well, it was intended to do the following: ensure that the environmental impacts of traffic, such as noise, air pollution, and safety concerns, continue to be properly addressed and mitigated through the California Environmental Quality Act, and also more appropriately balance the needs of congestion management with statewide goals related to infill development, promotion of public health through active transportation, and reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please. All right, and also real briefly before going into its consistency with adopted plans, to accomplish the goals of Senate Bill 743, the state recommended adopting a new method for evaluating transportation impacts under CEQA, which is vehicle miles traveled, instead of level of service, which is a measure of traffic congestion. So this policy, this policy is consistent with many of our adopted plans. And this shift in thinking at the state level has trickled down to the local level. And there are a lot of our Milpitas' plans and policies support the VMT policy and vice versa. So it was important for us to review these plans and policies to ensure that the new VMT policy aligns with the city's overarching land use and transportation goals. Therefore, staff conducted a thorough review of the California Environmental Quality Act to ensure compliance with state law, the recently adopted general plan, which calls for adoption of a new VMT policy and provides many goals and policies that support providing a balanced transportation network, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and encouraging mixed-use infill and transit-oriented development. So a lot of common goals here. And then also the TASP, the Transit Area Specific Plan, currently being updated to the Milpitas Metro Specific Plan, and also the Midtown Specific Plan, and the update to that will soon be underway. But we really looked at the existing plans, and we also try to look ahead to really make sure that we're focusing growth and development within Milpitas' priority development areas. And lastly, of course, the Climate Action Plan, which will implement the city's sustainability and greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals, which we are also updating at the moment. Next slide, please. It was a 4-step process to prepare the policy, and it consisted of outreach and engagement, technical evaluation, followed by development of the actual draft policy, and then now we're in the last stage of policy adoption. Next slide. Before going into the details of everything that we did, one of the key things that kind of happened throughout the development of the policy is that we participated in VTA's LOS to VMT working group. So they actually created a working group specifically for this topic. And this working group met on a monthly basis for over a year to discuss technical issues and also share resources. So in support of this transition, VTA updated the countywide travel demand model, generated existing VMT conditions for all the cities. So they did a lot of work for us already. Using that data, generated heat maps, which display the existing VMT conditions, developed a VMT evaluation tool. It's an online tool that you can plug in the details of a project, and it'll tell you what the expected VMT is for that project. and then also developed resources to aid with local policy adoption. Next slide, please. So the first step, outreach and engagement began with definitely a focus on education, and it included establishing a city website introducing VMT, forming a staff technical advisory group with biweekly meetings, coordinating with other departments, providing info memos, and presenting to decision makers and advisory bodies as yourselves. Next slide. The next step was technical evaluation to understand how implementing VMT would affect Milpitas. Staff reviewed the city's relevant plans and policies, and also the State Office of Planning and Research Technical Advisory, which provides recommendations to jurisdictions in adopting VMT policy. This was the primary guiding document for city staff, in addition to working with VTA and also reviewing what other cities are already doing. Next slide. Right, so based on the outreach and technical evaluation, staff then drafted the policy. The key policy components are right there. You can see it on the screen, but basically we started by setting the baselines and thresholds of significance, then determine which projects could be exempt or presumed to have a less than significant impact on VMT. We also evaluated figured out or provided guidance for evaluating transportation projects, also guidance for measuring regional projects, and also, last but not least, transportation operational analysis, also known as level of service, LOS. So now I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on each one, just so you guys understand all the key components of the policy. Next slide. So just to give a little bit of a warning, this upcoming information is a bit technical and heavy, but I'm going to try to explain it as clearly as possible. It's a lot of information, but I do think it's important because it really tells you and it gives you the rationale for how we came to this policy. So first, it's the baseline. And as you guys are aware, under CEQA, you typically measure a project's impact based on the existing conditions. You always have to understand what the existing conditions are and then see how the project impacts those existing conditions. So the first thing we did was to establish the baseline, also known as the existing VMT, from which to measure a project's impact. And cities are establishing two baselines, one for residential projects and one for employment projects, since these are the main types of projects that generate VMT. Cities have the option to define this baseline in three different ways. As you can see on the screen, the citywide average, which is the average VMT in Milpitas, vehicle miles traveled, the countywide average, which is the average VMT within the entire county, and then the regional average, which is the average VMT for the 9-county Bay Area region. That's why you see, if you look at the table, all of the numbers are a little bit different. So there's a lot of, I guess, a lot of reasons for slightly different numbers, but maybe we can get into that later, or maybe during the Q&A. But basically, you'll notice a couple of major things. Employment VMT is a little bit higher generally than residential VMT, which indicates that people travel farther for employment. So I think that kind of jives with what we already know, but you can kind of see it in the numbers here. Really, this is just to show how much people travel to get to a place. Next slide, please. So out of the three options, citywide, countywide, regional, staff is recommending the countywide average for both residential and employment projects because this aligns most closely with our general plan and specific plans, which I'll explain and show a little bit later when we go through the heat maps. Also, we consider the available existing resources within our control that would facilitate VMT reduction. So because various transportation coordination efforts take place at the county level, staff concluded that establishing a countywide average VMT as the baseline provides us with the greatest ability to successfully reduce VMT through countywide programs as the city participates in these programs. So you can see that those are the countywide average VMT numbers. We just wanted to put it on the screen to show you what those are. And this is going to be the baseline for how we measure impacts for projects, whether their VMT will be lower than this and by how much. Next slide, please. And this is where we get into the thresholds. The baseline obviously is then used to establish the threshold of significance. So if you're familiar with CEQA, you need a threshold at which, you need to define a threshold at which impacts become significant. So the state recommends a 15% below the baseline VMT. So this is what staff is recommending in line with the state's recommendation to adopt a 15% threshold below the baseline VMT. In other words, to kind of simplify this, when a project is studied, the project's estimated VMT should be 15% below the countywide average. Otherwise, the project's transportation impact will be considered significant. So even if you're reducing VMT from a project by 5%, that's considered significant because it's not reducing it by more than 15%. Next slide, please. So those are for projects that have to do the analysis. But following state recommendation, there are several projects that are presumed to have a less than significant impact just because of the nature of the project, that they're likely to reduce VMT. So the state recommends various projects to be exempt altogether. And these types of projects include small infill projects, retail projects that are locally serving, local serving city facilities, restricted affordable housing, transit supported projects within a half mile of existing transit, and transportation projects that reduce VMT. So if you look at this list, it kind of jumps out at you that you can see how these projects would generally, not have a high VMT because of their location near existing transit or just the nature of the project. So we'll go into each one a little bit. So let's go through the various exemptions. Next slide, please. The first one is, of course, small projects, which are typically proposed in existing developed areas and complement surrounding development. These are exempt from VMT analysis. Small projects are defined as any project that generates 110 daily trips or less. So you can see some of the examples right there, like a small development with 10 single-family detached residential units, or maybe one that has 15 to 20 multifamily residential units, or a 5,000 square foot office. Next slide, please. Another type of project that could be exempt from VMT analysis are local serving projects, which include retail projects that are 100,000 square feet or less, which is the typical size of a shopping center in Milpitas. An example of a retail project that could be exempt is a neighborhood shopping center with a grocery store, since it's conveniently located within an existing community and are accessible by walking or biking. Other local serving projects include city and or community facilities, such as branch libraries, fire stations, community centers, and neighborhood parks, since they're conveniently located and tend to reduce VMT. Next slide, please. So this is an example of a local serving retail project right in Milpitas here. It can easily be accessed by transit, biking, and walking. And furthermore, it's a mixed-use project, which provides the optimum conditions for reducing VMT. Because if you mix all the uses, then people won't have to travel as far to have access to the amenities and services that they need. So that's the rationale behind that. Next slide, please. The state also recommends that projects consisting of a high percentage of affordable housing may be exempt, as affordable housing is also shown to generate less VMT than market rate housing. So staff, in coordination with the Building Safety and Housing Department, is recommending the following. This is a little bit complicated, but basically for a 100% affordable project, the thresholds are there on the slide. Basically, it's for rental developments at or below 80% area median income. If we could back up, please. And then for ownership units, anything that's below 100% area median income. For mixed income rental developments, usually done by market rate developers, who are required to have some level of affordable housing. It's 10% minimum of the units at or below the 80% area median income. and an additional 10% minimum of the units at or below 50% area median income. And then for mixed income ownership developments, 10% minimum of the units at or below 100% AMI, and an additional 10% of the units at or below 80% AMI. A lot of numbers, but basically we established thresholds that were slightly higher than the city's affordable housing ordinance because we wanted to incentivize a higher yet achievable level of affordability to qualify for this exemption. Our intent was to encourage affordable housing on-site units. So we didn't want, to be exempt. We'd want developers to provide units on-site rather than opting to pay an in-lieu fee. And then also to have more mixed income projects, and also to facilitate housing production for the lowest income levels. Next slide. And then lastly, transit supportive projects. So the state also recommends that certain projects that are within a half mile of existing transit stops or stations or a high quality transit corridor be exempted from analysis. The state defines high quality transit corridor as all rail transit and bus routes with 15-minute headways during the peak hours. However, to qualify for this exemption, the project also has to be a type of project that supports transit. So not any kind of project, but you have to have a minimum floor area ratio of 0.75 for office or employment projects, 35 dwelling units per acre for residential projects. However, we wanted to establish a slightly higher threshold for areas that we envision and expect to have higher density, namely 50 dwelling units per acre in the Milpitas Metro Specific Plan area, and then 40 dwelling units per acre in the Sarah Center, which through the upcoming the update of the Midtown Specific Plan, we want to encourage revitalization of Sarah Center, to have some mixed use. Next slide, please. And actually later, we will review the maps that show the areas in Milpitas where projects are located within these transit priority areas. So it'll become a little bit more clear when we look at the maps. But to go on, so those are all density requirements, but these projects also have to be consistent with the sustainable community strategy, which is a regional plan. It also has to meet but not exceed the city's parking requirements, so not provide excess parking, but also not replace affordable housing with moderate or high income residential units. All right, so next slide, please. Quickly, this is an example of a transit supportive project located within a transit priority area. So under this policy, this project would be exempt from VMT analysis. However, the project would still be required to conduct a transportation operational analysis that would evaluate level of service outside of CEQA analysis, but more on this later. Next slide, please. So I do think, the easiest way to understand all this is by looking at some maps. So before we do look at the heat maps that VTA helped us create, I do want to spend some time going over the legend because I think that'll clarify what we're looking at. So again, there are two maps that describe the existing VMT conditions. There's a heat map for employment and also a heat map for households. And the legend, if you can see there, the green indicates where the VMT threshold, which again, to remind you, is 15% below the baseline or the countywide average VMT, is already met. So that's what the green color signifies. When you see yellow, it shows that these are areas that require minor mitigations to achieve this 15% threshold. And usually the project location and density will bring the VMT down to that threshold. The orange indicates where more extensive mitigation may be required. Typically, these areas are a bit further away from transit. And then lastly, red indicates where it will be extremely difficult to mitigate impacts. So when you look at the maps, you'll automatically see where it might be easier for a developer to develop a certain project. But in addition to the colors and the existing VMT levels, which they show, the map shows the city boundary, transit priority area boundaries, which we mentioned earlier. And also to remind you, these are the areas that are, where transit supportive projects are exempt from VMT analysis. So let's look at the heat maps. Next slide, please. So this map shows the city's existing employment VMT compared to the countywide average. So employment VMT indicates how much Milpitas residents are driving to get to their jobs. So again, the countywide average VMT is 16.64, and then the 15% reduction, the threshold is at 14.14. But as you can see, there are no green areas. So what this means is that some mitigation will be required for employment projects to reduce VMT impacts to less than significant, unless the project is exempt, as I went over the different exemptions earlier, or within a transit priority area, which is one of the exemptions. But you can see on the map, it's that the transit priority area is shown in the maroon buffer, the outline. So anything inside of that is potentially exempt if it's a transit supportive project. So you can also see that the areas requiring the least amount of mitigation are the areas with the greatest densities, mix of uses, and access to transit, which is closer to the transit area specific plan and some of Midtown as well. Next slide, please. Now this is the heat map for the city's existing VMT for residents compared to the countywide average. So this map indicates how much Milpitas residents are driving to get to everyday uses. And the countywide average VMT is a little bit lower for residential, 13.33, and the 15% threshold is at 11.33. As you can see, all of the Milpitas Metro specific plan area and much of Midtown are in the green area and already meet the 15% threshold, meaning that housing projects in these areas will require little to no mitigation, which is what we want, since this will encourage infill development in these priority development areas, which are already relatively dense and have strong access to transit. Next slide, please. So far, we've focused exclusively on land use development projects, but following the state's recommendation, the policy also provides guidelines for evaluating the VMT impacts of transportation projects. Transportation projects that reduce VMT are exempt from analysis. These projects include various safety projects, projects that improve pedestrian, bicycle, and transit access, and technology upgrades. However, projects that add vehicle capacity and induce more driving, such as the addition of through lanes on existing streets or highways, would be required to measure and disclose increases in VMT and potential impacts. Next slide, please. The policy also provides guidelines for how to evaluate regional projects that don't really fit under the neat categories of residential and employment project types. For projects that generate regional traffic from outside of Milpitas, such as large shopping centers, hospitals, private schools, or sports complexes, a net increase in total VMT may indicate a significant transportation impact. All right, so we're almost getting to the end. Bear with me. Next slide, please. So what about mitigation? Since the way we're measuring transportation impacts has changed, the way we mitigate transportation impacts has changed as well. There are 4 categories of VMT mitigation. The first is just the project attributes. So very often, a project's location, density, or land use diversity alone will reduce the VMT to the threshold. However, if the VMT needs further mitigation, projects can do the following. The second category is multimodal transportation improvements, which improve access to transit, bicycle, and pedestrian networks, and typically lower VMT as well. The third category of mitigation is parking strategies, including vehicle parking reductions and increased bike parking. I understand that reduced parking can have unintended consequences, so we will have to be sensitive to the existing conditions to determine whether it's appropriate for that neighborhood. And the last category is transportation demand management, which is especially effective in reducing VMT for employment projects. TDM measures include subsidized or free transit passes, employee shuttles, parking cash outs, telecommuting, and flex schedules. And the good news is that with the upcoming first and last mile transportation solutions on the way, Milpitas is well positioned to support multimodal transportation and reduce VMT. We recently received an approximately $1 million grant from VTA to implement an innovative on-demand van pool service for commuters. And we received support from council to move forward with a bike and scooter share pilot program. So we really do think that these other things that are going on in our city will complement our policy and vice versa. Next slide, please. So at this point, you might be wondering, well, what about traffic congestion, right? I think a lot of people are rightfully concerned about that. But in addition to measuring VMT to evaluate transportation impacts under CEQA, staff is recommending retaining intersection LOS analysis to meet city policy and congestion management program requirements. So we're not necessarily getting rid of LOS. It's just not considered a CEQA impact. So again, the analysis would be an operational analysis of Milpitas roadway conditions and would still identify potential deficiencies that may be addressed by the project. This analysis would include other transportation-related components, such as multimodal analysis of pedestrian, bicycle, and transit facilities, traffic signal warrant studies, or other traffic control, project site access and circulation, neighborhood issues such as cut-through traffic, traffic calming, parking, or other transportation analysis as required by the city. Most of the neighboring cities, such as San Jose, Santa Clara, Sunnyvale, and Mountain View, have continued to require LOS analysis outside of CEQA. Next slide. I know this is a lot of information, so I'd like to just summarize it right here. Staff is recommending the following as part of the new VMT policy. To establish a baseline VMT using the countywide average for both residential and employment projects. Establishing a CEQA threshold of significance of 15% below the countywide baseline VMT. Allowing for CEQA exemptions from CEQA analysis for small projects, local serving retail and local city projects, projects within transit priority areas, affordable housing, and multimodal transportation projects. Also to establish a methodology for transportation projects for analyzing those impacts. And lastly, to continue non-CEQA transportation analysis requirements to include intersection operational analysis, also known as LOS. Next slide, please. So this concludes our presentation. We just presented a lot of technical information, so we're definitely here and available to answer all of your questions. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. We appreciate your presentation this evening. And so commissioners, do you have any questions for staff that's here this evening? Mr. Jay Lee, also Mr. Steve Chen, our traffic engineer, is here as well as our consultant Karen Mack. So I'll just go ahead and go down the line from the commissioners. And so if you're welcome to address any questions to any of the three staff members as well as our planning staff as well. So Commissioner Albana, any questions for the staff this evening?
Chair, thank you, Chair. Can you circle back to me? I was still processing some questions in my mind.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Commissioner Galan?
Well, I have a question about the bike lane in the city. Do we have the map that people can identify which street that can use to put the bike lane? Do we have that? I think last month we discussed about that bike lane around the city. Do you? Hello.
This is Steve Chen, City Transportation Manager. We do have the city bike map available in print format as well as it's posted electronically on the city website. In addition, as you mentioned, we are working on a bikeway, pedestrian, and trail master plan update. As part of that update, we will also update the city's bike map.
I have a patient last week, and he brought his bike, and he parked inside the building, totally in front of my office. Did the city can provide a parking space for people brought their bike work, or if they have an appointment somewhere?
The city can provide bike as part of the adopted bikeway, bikeway, pedestrian, and trail master plan. There are recommendations to provide bike parking at various public locations. So yes, we can. We'll be looking forward to installing bike racks at various public locations where popular destination are located at.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Galan, and Commissioner Ciradella.
I'm up. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. The existing areas where you're a half a mile from a transit area, does that include like a bus stop?
Yes. So what qualifies as a transit stop or a bus stop under this policy, where we develop the transit priority area. It includes rail lines and then also bus lines, but not all bus lines, just those that have a peak headway time of 15 minutes or less, meaning they come at intervals of 15 minutes. So it has to be a relatively high frequency bus line in order to qualify as a high corridor, a high quality transit corridor.
And then my next question is, since this is a state mandated item, correct? Are they going to do anything with Calaveras going on to 237 when it just goes down to one lane?
I don't know if maybe Steve knows a little bit more about any potential future plans or.
And that includes our $80 million bridge going over the railroad tracks also.
Correct. Those are transportation or congestion relief projects. So this is something different. This is the CEQA analysis change. So to answer your question, there will be making improvement that the state or the Congestion Management Agency, VTA, will still be leading the charge on implementing congestion relief projects. But as part of those projects, they will need to do this new CEQA analysis as part of doing that project.
Okay. And then I also noticed that, maybe I don't ride the bus lines very often, but I know here on Park Victoria, right next to Kennedy, there's a bus stop. Would that change the color? Because, and I don't know how often they run. They have to run every 15 minutes to be able to change the color.
So the colors, what they really show are just the existing, like the existing vehicle miles traveled of that area relative to the average. So what a red means is that it's higher than normal, meaning it's an area where a lot of people are traveling longer distances. And then the green is where people are traveling less. So the bus line wouldn't necessarily change the color, but I do think maybe the question is if the bus line is frequent enough, if it could qualify, maybe the transit priority area is subject to change in the future, because we know that bus service isn't going to stay the same forever. So these maps will be updated over time as the service changes to be accurate to the current times. I don't know if Karen wants to add anything or anybody.
Yeah, and then, my next question on that same line, we've got bicycle areas on, for an example, Park Victoria, where you could ride a bicycle in that bicycle lane. Does that change anything or not?
The heat maps today, good evening, this is Karen Mack. The heat maps today, as Jay has stated, set a existing baseline based on what people are doing today in the city of Milpitas. It is measuring what the residents are doing. It's measuring what the employees are doing in Milpitas. Over time, as you put in bike lanes, as you increase your access to transit, the hope is that the behavior will change and the vehicle miles traveled will be reduced. And then those colors, the red colors, the orange colors, have the potential to change as they start to, people start to migrate out of their cars, as it becomes easier and more accessible to ride that in that bike lane. Right now, they're just measuring today's conditions. But I think that's the plan. This is a plan for the future. And I think that is the goal, is to increase transit, increase bicycle accessibility, improve pedestrian conditions.
do you really think, as a resident of California, that I'm not going to ride my car anymore?
Absolutely not. I think everyone will still drive their cars. I think that most developments will still generate vehicles. I think that the past way that the cities have developed has caused us to separate our housing from their employment. And the intent was to preserve a quality of life for residents. But now we have the congestion and the long trips and lots of reasons why people are living further and further away from their jobs. And so this is an attempt to undo that and to actually place jobs and housing closer together.
So in other words, the state wants us to make a lot more money so we can afford to live here rather than live out in the valley. Is that what you're saying?
I think the state wants the transportation and planning to merge.
Good luck.
And also to develop in areas where there already is development. I think what a big part of this is to, to avoid developers avoiding urban areas and going out into the, like low density, quieter neighborhoods. Because that when you start developing more on the outskirts is when you start to have people driving longer distances. It's trying to find a more efficient way of developing our cities to keep, the suburban neighborhoods maybe more so the way they are, and then put infill development in the areas where maybe, more development might work better.
Okay, since we have a moratorium, somewhat of a moratorium on not building anything in the hillside, I mean, that would be, hypothetically great if, people could buy a home up there and then be closer to where they work. But I think it's very difficult to find somebody to be able to buy a $2 million house and work, very close to where he is working, unless he's making a fortune.
Through the chair, may I offer a comment? Thank you. Commissioner Ciardella, I also just want to highlight the fact that we just spent a significant amount of time and resources bringing a BART station into Milpitas. And so the opportunities here are that people may not be able to live as close to where they work as ideally as they'd like, but they can certainly be able to utilize transit. And if they're able to walk or ride their bike or, use a shuttle or any of the options that we have, the goal here is that we want to be able to provide choices so that if you want to drive, if you want something else, that we have those kinds of options and that we can make it a little bit easier for those types of projects to get through the development review process, which is really what this VMT policy also gets to. So we want to give people choices. If they want to get out of their cars, they should be able to do that, and we should be able to create those kinds of environments. And the city is very committed to that, as you can see with that BART station. So we're really hoping that we can start to encourage those kinds of options for folks.
Of course, and all the projects that I was involved on Montague Expressway, all those people are going to take their bicycles to the BART station, correct, or walk?
I would hope so.
I don't think so.
Mr. Chair, if I may clarify one thing.
Please.
I just want to clarify again that the VMT policy is not a plan. It's not zoning. It's not a development project that's before you, like most things that we bring. It's a policy, and that as a policy, it's actually a policy of what measure we're going to use to measure traffic impacts. So that's all it is. It's the purpose is for CEQA. It was required by state law that we adopt a policy for VMT as our measure for traffic impacts. That's all it is. So it doesn't impact where somebody lives. It doesn't impact a choice of whether or not somebody drives or rides a bike. It's measuring how traffic is generated by new development that comes to the city. And as we've seen over the past 10, 12, 20 years, as long as Milpitas has been a city, there has always been development occurring here. So all we're saying here with this new policy is that as new development projects come forward, instead of measuring congestion on the roads for CEQA purposes, we're going to use a different measure called vehicle miles traveled. And that was designated by the state as the measure because it's actually a measurement of an impact on the environment, whereas congestion is just a measurement of impact on convenience and delay. So, and as was presented mentioned in the presentation, that doesn't mean we're abandoning level of service and we're not measuring, we're not conducting analysis of traffic impacts and congestion. We're still doing that, but it's just for a different purpose. VMT is for CEQA, level of service is for congestion. We will continue to use both to measure the impacts of new development on traffic in the city.
Thank you.
I understand.
Okay. And Commissioner Sardella, any other questions or we're good?
No, I think I'm okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Belong. Commissioner Belong?
Yes. So, I mean, after reviewing everything and hearing the presentation, I mean, I think that we're just trying to be in compliance with SB 743. Is that correct? I mean, we're not trying to change anything here, or I mean, if we did, we wouldn't be in compliance. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
We have a little bit of discretion, but a lot of it is laid out in the technical guidance from the state.
Okay. Yeah. I with that clarification, I really don't have any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Alcorn. Commissioner Alcorn. Commissioner Alcorn, can you hear me okay? You're mute. You're on mute. Commissioner Alcorn, please unmute. You're still muted.
I grabbed my AirPod and it changed all my settings. Good old Apple, thanks. Sorry, I have no questions. Thank you. That's a very good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. It's just clarification around, so the Planning Director had alluded to that there will be some use of the LOS versus VMT. I just want confirmation around that. And can you maybe give me, give some examples around using LOS, versus the VMT? It looks like it's maybe more around like some areas that might be a little bit more congested. Is that correct?
This is Steve Chen. Yes, that is correct. We will continue to use LOS where we foresee significant traffic generated by the project, especially on denser or more denser area, such as the Trader Joe's, even though that is CEQA exempted now by the VMT, but because it's of its location and its access, tight access, we do want traffic analysis, both analyzing the intersection LOS, the circulation, the queuing. Those would be looked at for those type of project where we foresee significant traffic generation that could impact surrounding area.
All right, thank you. That actually answered my question. Yeah, thanks for the example as well too. That's kind of what I was looking for. So that was perfect. Thank you very much. I don't have any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. We appreciate it. And Chair has a number of questions, so I'll spread it around to the staff here this evening. The first question is to Mr. Lee or Ms. Mack. So how often does the state mandate the VMT to be updated so they stay relevant and to the times that were before us?
Good evening. This is Karen Mack. The state has not mandated yet, because it's relatively new and there's many cities that haven't adopted their policies yet. But I suspect with the CAP, the Climate Action Plan, and the Climate Action Plan report cards, that there will be a time where we'll have to update the VMT baselines, because the Climate Action Plan requirement for reporting out it's so intertwined. It's going to measure how effective we are. But a city can choose, like the city of Milpitas could choose a date or a time where they would want to update their own baseline. So there's really no time listed or required. So I think that you could choose that, choose a time that you think is appropriate.
Thank you, Ms. Mack. And so, Mr. Lee, is there sort of a projected, we will look at this VMT every 10 years. It's kind of like a census data, I think you updated.
I don't think there's a specific number in mind, but VTA is also, because a lot of the data is also from VTA. I think it partially depends on how often they want to update the data as well. I don't know, Karen might know a little bit more, but I imagine it wouldn't, be too long, because I think the data can be updated pretty quickly as development projects continue to come in and have impacts, like potentially reducing VMT.
Okay. Question to Mr. Lee and Ms. Mack. So the question here is, what actually triggered the measuring methods of the VMT, versus the LOS, sort of as a sort of the guidelines. So understand there's the climate action aspect of it, but how does it come about to choose this methodologies as the gold standard?
I could speak generally, and maybe Karen could add some detail. But from my understanding, as we're aware, the state has been really pushing for reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, which I think is a good thing. California is a bit ahead of the game, I would say, in terms of that, in that regard. So I do think a lot of this is tied to the desire to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and all the goals that we as a state have set for ourselves. And they're I don't remember the exact numbers, but they're fairly aggressive. So, this is one of the ways to help accomplish that. When you drive less, you have less greenhouse gas emissions. So.
Yeah, and I might add that we have been using VMT for noise and air quality for years. And so I think there's a desire from the state to align those things. So in a CEQA document, they're in alignment. So VMT, to be able to measure transportation impacts as in addition to air.
Okay.
Quality, excuse me.
Thank you. So we are still going to be using the VMT as well as the LOS as both models for depending on the appropriate locations. Is there a point where we may have one superseding the other, or one will override the other for that matter?
The state was pretty disappointed that cities chose to keep measuring level of service. But because for community concerns, people understand congestion measures, they understand the level of service. So cities, venturing into new policy took the conservative approach of keeping level of service. I think the thought is that over time that we wouldn't need to look at level of service. However, level of service does ensure that we continue to monitor and invest in our transportation roadway network. And the roadway network serves everybody, bicycles, pedestrians, vehicles, and also provides the ability for us to do technology upgrades. So I would think that a city would want to continue to somehow measure level of service, either with developments and also with CIP and other transportation analysis methods.
Okay, thank you. And generally speaking, any any sort of infill development comes in with any level of density, there's always going to be the neighborhood or neighboring concerns about, the OMG, the traffic issues. From a level service, that the A through F, is a pretty easy concept to adopt for the layperson or the neighbors of concern about the project. And then when it goes to VMT, I'm from the development side, so I don't, I always look at this like, okay, it is what it is. But from a layperson, the neighbor's standpoint, grasping the VMT and grasping that in a context, that's unless you're in the business, it's pretty hard to grasp that and mount an effective argument against the VMT, selected.
Absolutely, I would agree. And I think that even transportation professionals are grappling with how to communicate the VMT to lay people and people that are concerned about their communities. And so I think as we get better at it, and it becomes more of the standard, it's my opinion that people will begin to understand it more. They may not like it more, but they may understand it more as more and more information is published.
I agree with you, Ms. Mack. I'm understanding this first order of business here. So on that same note, so question for Mr. Chan. So now we have a whole bunch of VMT data to deal with. So does that give you a better tools to manage the lights, the traffic lights, and the whatnots? The traffic calming tools.
Unfortunately, no. The VMT data set gather is macro. What we need for operation changes is more micro. So we may need more granular data than what's available from the VMT data set.
So what I'm hearing here is that you're still going to be relying on the LOS to kind of give you that more sort of to the intersection count. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so then circling back to the planning the staff. So with projects with any sort of significant concerns, do we still kind of use both methodologies so we could look at from both angles?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we'll continue to use both methods. On the planning side, if a CEQA document or environmental analysis under CEQA is required, we will use VMT. But we always were, as you know, work very closely with our transportation engineering staff partners, and they are obligated to address the county's congestion management plan. And so the measurement for that will continue to be LOS. So both will be used. One, on the planning side, we're looking at it from environmental impacts, and on the transportation side, they're looking at it from the efficiency of the roadway perspective. And I would like to add too that where Karen and I both worked in San Jose a few years ago when the city of San Jose enacted its VMT policy. It's one of the first ones in the state, very large city over a very large geographic area with a lot of different, you have the downtown and areas around the Diridon station, and then you have far-flung areas from Almaden Valley over to other areas. So one thing about Milpitas is I think we're very fortunate, as you saw on one of those heat maps, we have a very, very large green area in the middle of our heat map. And part of that is because we have, as was pointed out by the planning manager, we have the Milpitas Transit Center, which is not only a BART station, but includes light rail and bus service. And that gives many opportunities for people to get out of their car and use other types of transportation if they wish. It's not just about bicycles again. But because we have that large green area, any project that falls into that green area is more or less exempt from this type of analysis. And if you compare that green map with our where all of our development is occurring in the city, or primarily occurring, which is the transit area and some areas of Midtown. It pretty much coincides with that green map. So to your comment earlier, Chair Tao, most of the major development projects that come into the city, if they fall into that area, one way or the other, they will likely be exempt from this type of analysis, and that's very different. Even though they're exempt, we'll continue to look at the LOS and how those projects will impact the function of our roadways, but we won't necessarily have to do full environmental analysis on those projects. And that's a benefit.
So tagging along that question there, Director Thomas, is so we still have the metro and the gateway plans, specific plans coming up. So the city will conduct the master EIR and also the traffic look, and then the projects that come in, they're falling within the guidance of those particular master plans, correct? Correct. Okay, thank you. And question for both Ms. Mack and Mr. Lee is that does the VMT take into account of the newfangled, the ride-hailing services? Every time I turn on the service, it's got kind of like ants crawling on the map, and that is that also accounted as part of the consideration?
So that's a great question. The VMT measures that we're looking at today was based on the 2010 census. So it comes from the MTC, along with California household surveys and the census information. And they use that along with information from cities in terms of how many employees and how many residents they have to estimate what the VMT is. Those ride services was kind of not accounted for as well as it could be in 2010. And so right now, San Francisco, actually not now, it was actually before COVID, started studying, I think Fair and Pierce put together a pretty extensive report on the extent of the effect of Uber and Lyft. And certainly in cities like LA and San Francisco, it turned the dial. It made VMT go back up because they made it so convenient. So the next census data that we would expect, which is the last census that we took, would take into consider the ride services. And then we should see some modification or change. But I would say that the data that we're looking at today doesn't wholly take it into consideration because it's just exploded in the transportation, in cities in the last few years.
So what I'm hearing here is there's an inherent hole in the plan because of that kind of tags in my earlier question. Is technology changes and things change, and we're going to account for flying vehicles at some point in time as well. It's a VMT.
Well, so we're setting a baseline, remember? So we're making a line in the sand, and we're saying here's the baseline today, and now the opportunity for us to look at land uses that come into the city and say this isn't good enough. You need to reduce your VMT by 15%. So we're creating a new standard where right off the bat, they have to reduce the amount of traffic they generate instead of just accepting what they're generating. Does that make sense?
Fair enough, and I'll still take my flying vehicle at some point.
I think everybody hopes for flying vehicles.
Right, and memory serves me. Looking at some of the older TV programs from China back in the metropolitan areas back in the days. I think the VMT issue was the number of bicycles. We're highly encouraging bicycles and other form of transportations as the gold standards for transporting. Are we anticipating the sort of the shifting of sand where the bicycles and the scooters and whatnots become overwhelming is a sort of byproduct of your success?
I think if you look at published data, they always point to the number of dry days in the state of California and the number of optimum weather conditions that people could reasonably ride, because of course they're successful lots of different places in other countries where they have a lot of rain. So I think that it's still much more convenient, and we love our cars. But I think the hope is that as we run out of space to expand our roadway networks, as we run out of money to maintain our roadways, that we provide other options and really program the space we have, again, as we had stated earlier, to provide those options to take advantage of other possibilities.
Okay. So thank you for the response there. And, in new state legislation is also allowing for certain type of development, infill development, residential projects to be constructed without or planned without parking. So does that also change the calculus for what we're doing here?
Managed parking is one of the most successful VMT reduction strategies. So developments, I mean, not everybody wants to be San Francisco, but using San Francisco as an example, they've made it difficult to drive by reducing parking drastically. And so, yes, that's a very effective strategy for reducing VMT.
Okay, thank you.
And I would, if I could add a little bit, so those are specific types of projects that have to meet a lot of other criteria to qualify, for that level of streamlining. So, that although there will be some, that there is some overlap, a lot of the projects will still be required to provide the regular level of parking. And that's really where, most of the reductions that we're citing in terms of the VMT reduction will come into play. Is for the average project where you don't, you have to provide some parking, and then you have to, reduce it a little bit from there.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. One last question, and this is sort of more geared towards Director Thomas and the planning manager on the hypothetically to say if there's a retail, a sizable neighborhood retail center or regional retail center that kind of goes through the redevelopment process. So can we just kind of briefly walk through under this VMT process here? Essentially, if they surpass certain permit value, it's going to trigger the entire review process. So how does that work? Given that it's most of them have large parking fields, and it's just going to dramatically, instead of just changing the square footage, I mean changing the interior, if it exceeded the value of the permit, then we're basically blowing up the center in a way. Is that correct?
Well, I think it depends a little bit on the nature. First, the size of the commercial development, and as Jay mentioned in our policy, retail or commercial projects that are under 100,000 square feet are going to be exempt. So it's going to depend a little bit on where it is, depends on the size, and it depends on the nature of the project itself. If it's a tenant improvement, that is not going to have significant impact. I don't know that we could even use that as, or that we would even look at CEQA when we're looking at something like that. It would really depend, if it's changing the use significantly, issues such as that. And I think we just really have to look throughout the city itself. Where do we have commercial development? Where is it anticipated? Those are already well-established areas. And if let's say the Sarah Center, as we're doing the Midtown specific plan update, and we're looking at that, if that's going to be completely bulldozed and rebuilt, then I do believe we would want to look at VMT, but it also depends, because those buildings may be smaller than 100,000 square feet if they're, individualized buildings versus one larger kind of development. Ned, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I guess my only thought was that if something is proposed with a large parking field and it is going to induce more traffic, it would clearly go over the threshold that's established for VMT and would require full environmental analysis under CEQA, a full EIR.
Also, an important point is whether it's locally serving or not. So, a lot of these shopping centers, neighborhood shopping centers, they're considered locally serving, meaning people are coming from the neighborhoods right next to it. So, that's why we set a fairly high threshold of 100,000, square feet, so we don't trip up some of these, smaller projects that really typically putting more retail, in a suburban neighborhood would not result in a VMT increase. It's really the regional retail projects that draw, visitors from, cities, like many cities away, where it could be more of a problem. But, as Jessica mentioned, because a lot of these projects that are just tenant improvements won't require CEQA, and also because of the fairly high threshold that we established, we don't think there would be any, smaller retail projects that would be unfairly kind of targeted or adversely impacted that way.
Thank you. Thank you to the planning staff. Appreciate it. I have no further questions. Circling back to the commissioners, any additional questions for staff and the consultant? Okay. Commissioner Ciardella?
Yeah, since you talked a little bit about Sierra, and over the years, I've seen different projects that they want to do, hotels, retail, housing, and that's probably going to be over 100,000 square feet. Would that affect that project?
I think Commissioner referring to the Sarah Center, and that's also part of the Midtown specific plan. So we're going to be jumping into a pretty in-depth analysis of that particular area and looking at, particular regulations, how we're going to be looking at development standards out there. So I'd say there have been some concepts that have been presented to the city in the past that are, those are great ideas. We're going to take those ideas and incorporate that line of thinking into the specific plan update as we go into that. But again, as I was mentioning, and as Jay also said, it really does depend on the size of the buildings that get built. If we're going to consider that a locally serving project, if it's going to induce traffic, as Ned mentioned. So there's a lot of factors to consider, and I think it's a little premature to say how we would go about it, analyzing it. But we will be doing analysis of the entire specific plan area through the CEQA process. So we'll be doing an environmental impact report then, and we will be looking at VMT through that process.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Garner. And one last note to Mr. Lee here is on the slide, the Sarah Center is referred to as Sierra Center. So we may want to go ahead and alter that. We appreciate that. And so, thank you. And seeing no further questions, commissioners, any comments, discussions, or motions?
Through the chair, this being a public hearing.
Oh, my apologies. Thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you. Thank you, City Attorney. And this being a public hearing, so, and Ms. Medina, do we have any public comments?
Hi, Chair. We have no community members in the queue for comments.
Okay, so can I have a motion to close the public hearing?
A motion to close the public hearing.
Thank you,
Second.
Vice Chair. Okay, and Commissioner Alcorn, thank you. And I'll go down the line for the vote. And Commissioner Albana?
Aye.
Commissioner Galan?
Aye.
Commissioner Ciardella?
Aye.
Commissioner Belong?
Aye.
Commissioner Alcorn?
Aye.
Commissioner Chuan, Vice Chair Chuan?
Aye.
Chair, aye as well, 7-0 to close the public hearing. So Commissioner, circling back, any comments and discussions or motions?
Through the chair,
Please.
I'll make a motion to adopt resolution number 21-011, recommending that the city council adopt a new citywide policy establishing vehicle miles traveled VMT as the standard of measurement for analysis of potential environmental impacts from traffic under the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA.
Second.
Thank you. Is it second by Commissioner Alcorn?
Yes.
Thank you. And so Chair will go down the line for the vote. Commissioner Albana.
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Galan.
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Ciradella.
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Belong.
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Alcorn.
Aye.
Vice Chair Chuan.
Aye.
Chair Tao, aye as well. Motion passes 7-0. And I'd like to thank all the staff members here this evening, and as well as Ms. Mack for your time with us this lovely Wednesday evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and moving on to the next agenda item, here's new business, and we have no item under new business this evening. So as some legal news for the general public's consumption here, any person aggrieved by any final decision of any board, commission, or department head to the city of Milpitas may appeal the decision to the city council by filing written notice of appeal with the city clerk within 12 calendar days of the date of said decision and paying the required fee. The time limit shall be strictly enforced. Thank you. And the next agenda item here is adjournment. May I have a motion, please?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, who spoke first?
I'm second.
Mr. Alcorn and then Mr. Galong.
Well, Ms. Medina, I'll stop speaking in front of
I
you.
was like, whoa.
Thank you very much for picking that up. So Commissioner Alcorn, motion, and Commissioner Galan second. Thank you. And I'll go down the line for the vote. Commissioner Albana.
Aye.
Commissioner Galan.
Aye.
Commissioner Ciradella.
Aye.
Commissioner Belong.
Aye.
Commissioner Alcorn.
Aye.
Vice Chair Tron.
Aye.
Chair, aye as well. Meeting adjourned, and we'll see everyone again in 2 weeks. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thank you, staff. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.